Welcome to the Other Americans. We are your favorite unlikely duo, Ronnie and Noor, where conversations are as diverse as our backgrounds. Join two globe-trotting expats as they discuss how living abroad reshapes the concept of being American, connecting cultures, challenging stereotypes, and celebrating differences one story at a time. I'm your host, Noor Sultan. This is my co-host,
Ronnie Caldwell, Mr. C.
Mr. C, Mr. C, A, B,
Sing
C,
it.
D, E, F, G.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That's enough.
First of all, Um, I want to start off this episode just thanking
Sure.
everybody for the support so far.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, it's been pretty cool.
Mhm.
Y'all are digging the stuff, even though you're not really interacting. That's fine. I'll just let it slide this one time. It's fine, whatever.
What? What do you mean they're not interacting? What do you mean?
They're interacting, but they're like shy. I know that they're just being really shy because they're like, oh, I'm
Oh,
like scared to comment and like, oh, scared to share and like, oh gosh, but don't be
it's
scared,
okay. It's
guys.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, they'll share, they'll like, they'll subscribe, whatever, in their own time. It's
yeah.
all good.
And you
Hmm?
know what? It's gonna be great. And we want you guys to be here. So stay forever.
Whoa. Wow, that's spooky. All right. All right,
It
Nora.
doesn't have to be
Mhm.
spooky. It can be a really great time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
guys. We love you here. It doesn't need to be spooky at all.
But
All
actually we've
right.
been getting really cool responses to some of the questions that we've been posting on social media. And I feel
Awesome.
like it would be great if we could just like answer a couple of their questions really quick, you know?
Oh, okay. Sure. I mean, what do we got?
So,
Hmm.
um, a lot of you guys had some similar answers. It was really interesting to see. Because we're so focused on being a TCK and expats in this community, a lot of the questions were very centered around those ideas, obviously.
Hmm.
And one of the questions that we got a lot were, let's see, were feelings of settling down in the West after living abroad. So, like,
Hmm.
how do you go from being a big fish in the pond to being just a teeny tiny tadpole in America or back in Europe or Canada or wherever you're going?
Hmm.
That is such a real thing that happens to, I think, a lot of college kids, or high schoolers to college students.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, you would be, you have, this is somewhere where you might have a little bit more experience in terms of just that idea of going from being the student at international school
Mm-hmm.
to being, back in college or what have you. I've talked to my kids through it as they go through it. And then a lot of alums who've come back and forth and people who are now working professionals who I've talked to. So, it seems that one of the things I can say the consistent struggle is that when you're international or an expat, people get close to each other pretty quickly, right? Like, I guess because all of us are away from home, we feel the pressure to make a home wherever we are. Mhm. But when we go to a university or you go back home, other people are home. So they've already got
100.
families, they've got other people who are already part of their social
Oh,
circle.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, they've already got those kind of obligations and stuff like that, which none of us really have to the same extent when we're
Mm-hmm.
expats,
Yep.
because it's like, you are my community, you are my family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's one of the toughest things, is that sometimes we think that maybe we should be able to get along quicker, or we
Mm-hmm.
might be more open to making fast friends than other
Yes.
people who haven't lived as
Ooh,
expats are. And so, and when that happens, it's kind of confusing, I think, because
yeah.
you might have been so used to, oh, well, me and you are just going to talk and we're going to hang out and we're probably going to be
Oh my God,
friends, maybe, or
Mr.
get along,
C.
right?
The story of my life is unfolding right now. Like this is
Okay.
this is everything
All
that
right.
happened to me in university. Like
Okay.
I had so many expectations about what friendships were going to look like. And it was
Hmm.
so subconscious. How could I have known that all of this expat TCK would just unfold in front of me the way that it did? And it was
Mm-hmm.
really expecting friends to force like there's so much forced compatibility in the beginning where
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, these are the people around me, so
Yeah.
they're going to be my friends, and
Yeah.
beggars can't be choosers. So
Right.
if I didn't
Sure.
get along with someone, or if I didn't really like someone, I didn't I didn't I was like, okay, yeah, this is gonna be the person that, like, we're in the same classes, we're in the same community, we live close to each other. And you tend to put up with a lot. Like, I put up with a lot because I was like, oh yeah, this is
Mm.
gonna be my family. And
Right.
we're going to have to be friends because that's how it's like operated my entire childhood.
Sure.
Come to find out, the way that I viewed them
Mm-hmm.
was, pieces of my new family, people
Mm-hmm.
that I was going to ride or die for. But to
Yeah.
them, I was just a college or university friend. And they
Yes.
already had friends. They
Yeah.
have their family. They have
Sure.
their community. And I'm just that girl that lived abroad and is weirdly trying to integrate herself into the group all the time. And
Yes.
that,
Yes.
I never thought that I was going to put myself in that situation. And it happened so many times. And it is
Mm-hmm.
so humbling. I'll tell you that. That is a lot of character development over a short
No,
period of
no.
time.
For sure. No, I remember now a kid, and I don't even remember his name, but we had an international dorm. So the dorm that I lived in at UT was known for being over 50% of the people who lived in the dorm were from other countries. But one kid was he had been raised in international schools. And I remember that about him, like him saying that, he lived in this country, that country, that country. But I remember a lot of people thought he was kind of strange because he seemed so nice to everybody. He seemed like he wanted to like talk to everybody, and he was like, "Hey man, how you doing?" He was always trying to meet people. And when I think back about him, I feel really bad because I think it was like he came off kind of strong to a lot of people because they're like, "Man, he's interesting, huh?" Like, because he was really, and we already had our friends, or my family's right down the street, right? Like
Yep,
I'm
yep,
in
yep.
Austin, but my family's like an hour and a half in San Antonio,
Exactly. You have to go home
and
on the weekends.
right, right. Or it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting, like, and so, but for him, like now that I think about it, I'm like, oh, he was a TCK. He's sitting there like singing, "Hey, we all live in this dorm."
Yep.
I mean, I can get along with everybody here.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, it's like that's not how. And I see that now with my own family because
Yeah.
I try to imagine, like I go see my own family and
Mm-hmm.
I try to imagine them because they have like their routines, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see these people. They see these people at these times. They do these
Yep.
things. They have these routines that
Mm-hmm.
are already set with like
Yep.
family that's been there for a long time. And
Yeah.
I think to myself, how would a person trying to integrate in, a
Mm-hmm.
person trying to like, hey, get
Yeah.
that would be really hard as a singular individual,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And but the important part to know is that it's not personal, right? It's not personal. It's
Tea. Tea.
it's not personal. It's just they don't know where you're coming from. They lived an entire
Yeah.
differently lifestyle. But I think a lot of TCKs or a lot of kids who go from, or even expats who've been around
Mm-hmm.
for, they're like, man, am I messed up? Is there something
Yeah.
wrong with me?
Oh
Am
my
I just not
God.
able to? You're right. And so I think that's a difficult thing, though. It's a difficult thing.
I took it so personally. I took it so freaking personally. And it's not even like, oh, this happened like my first year university. This happened last year in October. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not something that that is just like my past. Like, I'm still struggling with
Sure.
this. And it
Right.
took a lot to realize that these people, like, okay, it's not only reintegration into like society, it's reintegration into your family. And like,
Mm-hmm.
they try to like make space for you and you try to make space for them. And I struggled so much with like just being part of that, because I'm like, where is my place in all this? And
Mm-hmm.
the friends that I made, I would have such high expectations of, reciprocation, of trying to make plans and, continuously trying to build connections with the same people. But then I realized, like, why don't these people make the time to reach out to me? Like, how come they don't actually make
Mm-hmm.
plans? Like, why am I always the one initiating for everyone to get together? And it's because they already
Sure.
got their own thing going on. I have nothing
That's
going
right.
on. And like I literally have nothing going on, guys. And it's just like
Sure.
that was such a hard pill to swallow. And I think it was really unfair for me, at least,
Mm.
to project that expectation onto these people when they never, that's not their responsibility. It's not their responsibility to take care of me. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt that responsibility to them because that's what I'm used to, but
Mm-hmm.
it just never worked. And I I thought that what I was doing when I left for Saudi to work with you was
Mm-hmm.
taking a break from that side of my life where I just felt really kind of empty in my friendships. And I was like, this has no one is like, there's no value here. I don't feel that these friendships are bringing value into my life. But the
Mm-hmm.
truth is that my expectations were misguided. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I just needed to reframe the way that I looked at these friendships. And I
Right.
honestly regret the way that sometimes I just kind of ghosted people. Like that
Yeah.
is that's not what you're supposed to do. And
Yeah.
I definitely probably should have communicated more, but in that moment I just felt very hurt and I took it very personal. And like I don't know, it's just really
Mm-hmm.
complicated sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
I at this point I'm just gonna like allow things to exist and I'm gonna go where I feel that there is reciprocation. So like we'll see how that goes. Well, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
learning as I go.
Yeah. I growing up, I would say moving a lot in the United States is different than being an expat because when you move a lot in the United States, people aren't necessarily nice to the new kid, and they're not necessarily excited about getting a new kid, right? Because most people aren't new kids. Whereas expat, a new kid comes to school or a new kid comes in, you're like, oh, okay, a new person, interesting. Like actually,
New friends.
expats get excited about new people,
Yeah, we
right?
get so
Coming in
excited.
excited. But yeah, man, what I learned is kind of how to watch and figure out how to integrate with different folks, right? Um, I learned a lesson about, and I was always moving to different types of places, different schools, how to find friends and make friends kind of quickly and kind of be okay with whatever they were giving me, right? And I think that actually when you're living overseas, you have to practice adaptability, right? You have to actually be pretty flexible, like because you were saying that same thing of, well, I have to learn that person might be different. They have a whole different culture, but we're still going to get along. They're different. We have a whole different culture. We're going to get along. And not also understanding that when you go back home or when you go to this other thing, you're actually going to have to keep that as well in the same thing. Is you're gonna have to be like, oh, that's how they do things. Okay, it's gonna change. I'm gonna have to be adaptable to that and work from it. And I think
Yeah.
one of the hardest things is where is home after a while,
Oh
right?
God. Big
Is
question.
figuring, yeah, is figuring out, well, where is home? I've been away for a long time. Is this still home? And yeah, I mean that's always a question, right? Where is
Yeah.
home? And
There was another question I think related to that. Um and it was so we asked like how do you cope with saying goodbye to friends in international communities? And
mm,
someone wrote that they don't say goodbye to the people that they grew up with in international communities, that they
mm-hmm,
accept that we all have separate destined lives and we can always travel to each other. And
mm,
that's a great perspective, but it's so much more difficult to actually do. like,
yeah,
like yeah, we can always see each other, but that's like years into the future where assuming that everyone has like a pretty decent income and we can all travel to each other. Um I I would love to see my friends more often. I'm broke as hell.
yeah.
I barely have a job.
It's expensive, right? It's
It's so
expensive once you
expensive.
Oh man, no. Yeah, I mean, I think that's best hope, right? The best
Yeah.
hope is that we'll see each other again and everything else, but man,
Hmm.
people get busy.
Yeah.
People get busy, life happens, and man, yeah, plans happen. People are spending money on different things. You don't realize how difficult it is
Mm-hmm.
to coordinate around someone's schedule. You're no longer going to school on the same schedule. You're no longer working on the same schedule. When
Yep.
is your vacation time? You're
Yep.
still going to have other family that wants to see you. Mom and dad might not be in the same place, and so that's great if you set that up and you
Yeah.
want to make that happen.
Yeah.
We did that with friends that I've had in college, where we just made it. We dedicated that every
Mm-hmm.
summer we'll see each other,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've kept that up pretty consistently over the
Mm-hmm.
last 20 years. Pretty good.
Yeah.
We've only missed a couple of summers,
Right.
and that's been good. But it's difficult. It's
Yeah.
difficult.
Because it's a balancing act. You're living
Mm-hmm.
overbroad. You're living overseas, so not only do you not see your friends, but you don't see your family. And then there's so much family. There's so much more family than I ever remember, especially in
Sure.
like Asian families. Like, why are there so many
Mm-hmm.
kids, bro? Like, and they're just multiplying
That's right.
all the time. And then there's just like so many. And then if you don't make time for some of them, there's obviously cultural like
Mm-hmm.
disrespect sometimes, and it just
Sure.
feels like you're avoiding people and blah blah. I feel like the culture is getting a little bit better, but if you make time for one side, you have to make time for the other. And then
Yeah.
just gets kind of crazy. So like, and that's assuming that you don't already have like a partner, right? Because I feel like when you're like, I see it with my sister and her husband. she's
Sure.
like she's like I can't do any family stuff with our family today because I have to go with my husband to see his family, and it's
Mm-hmm.
splitting time, but that's time away from the people that you could be
Of
spending
course.
time with. And then it's just like I feel like it just gets so messy. It just gets messy, bro.
And I think and that's just life, right? Like, I mean, I think that is sometimes we can look at the messiness of things and be like, God, and think that there's a way that if you just got it this way, it would just be perfect. But that's life, right? I mean,
That's
there's the
life.
split, and that's right, and I think that too. I think it would help
Mm,
because over the years I've spoken to a lot of alumni who've
right.
left,
Mm-hmm.
come back. I would say 90 something percent of them all feel the same way.
Yep.
So to a certain extent, sometimes it's like, well, that's not very helpful. But to
Yeah.
another part,
For
I'm
real.
like, but to another part, I'm like, it is if you're starting to think of yourself as abnormal because you feel that
Mm,
way.
right.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think I sent you a video I shared, but just it was this idea of, a healthy self awareness
Mm-hmm.
normalizes what we think is pathological,
Right.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, it's normal to have a little sense of loneliness, a little sense of
Yeah.
loss, and to try to find your way through, but accepting that
Uh-huh.
and then still navigating it. Like, I think that, I've seen people who they find it, eventually they find their people when they keep trying different things.
Right.
They keep trying different things, and eventually
Mm-hmm.
you find your folks.
Yeah.
And but don't give up, because I think the worst part is when people give up and they just stay home. If you stay home, you don't find your folks.
What? I'm not staying home. What are you talking about? I go out all the time, as you
You
see.
got to go out there. You don't
What?
got to be clubbing, but you got to get involved. Go out there and try some things. Yeah.
Yeah, I do that all the time. It's exhausting. It's literally like
Mm,
okay, I can only imagine this from my perspective. I'm an
sure.
extrovert. I'm very
Yeah.
social. I
Yeah.
make it so easy for people to get to know me. Sometimes I give too much.
Okay.
One would say. I can't even imagine what it's like for my more introverted friends who are feeling lonely and feeling like,
Mhm.
the same feelings that I'm feeling. Because if
Sure.
someone doesn't try to like converse with me, usually, especially in a
Hmm.
university setting, I'm like, oh, maybe they just don't like me. But like, it's also very atypical for someone to not talk to me because I make it very easy. And so
Sure.
I can't even imagine what my other
Hmm.
homies are going through. And I know we got some
Yeah,
introverted homies out there. But
for sure.
the thing
Hmm.
is, there is no comfort in, well, at least for me, there's no comfort in knowing that my other friends are feeling lonely too. Like, yeah, to
Mhm.
an extent, it's kind of like satisfying, like, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. But it's just like we're all just freaking lonely then. We can't see each other still.
Well, you know what? I tell you this. Um, so one thing I asked someone, they were all together here. They came in Saudi and they all got together and stuff like that. They're like, "Oh man, it feels so good to talk to each other." It's like, "Great, cool. How often do y'all call each other?" No, no, don't we don't. Like,
Yeah. Okay, well, listen to this. I do call my friends. I just spoke to them yesterday.
well,
So,
there you go. But that's what I'm saying.
but
I
it's still
mean,
like
and
the time
it's something.
differences. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's not being in the same place. It's not being in the same place, right?
No.
And you can't make a whole life
Mm-hmm.
around your friends who are in other places.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
have to try to make a life out of where you're at, you know?
I
I
don't
mean,
want to
for
do
me,
that.
hey, for me, I'll tell you what, it's one of the things I do fear as well, right?
Mm.
Because I have a really tight knit group of friends here
Yeah, you
who
do.
we see each other multiple times a week. We have
Uh-huh.
hey, you want to know who people who are really interested in being your friends are? See if
Mm.
there's people who have a routine where they want to schedule time to see you each week. Because friends that really want to see you, hey, well,
Mm-hmm.
you want to get together? Why don't we try to get together every Thursday for an hour
Yeah.
and play a game or do whatever? But when
Yeah.
you do that, and I built that over these years, we're about to go to Bali, and man, I'm being an entrepreneur. I'm gonna be alone the whole day,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not going to have that. So I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
have to build that up. And that's
Yeah.
scary, man. It never stops being scary,
Oh,
but we got to go ahead and try.
Mr. C, that's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of cute.
Okay.
Like you're gonna be
Oh,
sad and lonely, like,
oh
oh, it
no.
still happens when we get older. Not that
That's
you're
right.
not that you're old, but like
Well, I am older than you.
yeah. But that
Sure.
leads me to another question where someone asked,
Sure.
is there an adult version of TCK? What sort of struggles have you experienced and overcome?
You know, I would say as an adult, when you leave home, there's definitely a feeling of why'd you leave us? Right? As an
Betrayal.
adult, yeah, man, when you're leaving to, like people thought when we left, maybe 2 years, maybe they'll be gone for 2 years and then come home. And for a long time, I mean, even still now, like we've been out since 2006. There's not a summer that goes by where my family doesn't ask me, when y'all coming back? When are
Oh
you moving back to
yeah.
the States?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to have to answer over and over again, well, I don't know. I don't know about this
Mm-hmm.
year. Or,
Yeah.
well, we just took a job here. We're going to be moving there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a struggle because it's sort of trying to remind them you're making your choices to try to make the best life for your immediate family. You got your responsibilities to your kids, to your wife, all those kind of things, and then having to convince you, I still love y'all. I still love you and everything else, and I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna see you.
Yeah.
But it's that it's working with that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
feeling like you're missing things.
Yeah.
Like I miss like even my nieces, my nephews, my
Yeah.
cousins. Like they have birthdays I miss. The
Mm-hmm.
parties I miss. I miss
Yeah.
those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think on the adult version, it's more feeling like you're missing some of these like events that people all talk about,
Yeah.
and then also hoping that they realize you're not trying to abandon them and not running
Yeah.
away from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're running towards something,
Yeah.
right? That's it. Yeah.
Oh man. That feeling of betrayal, like sometimes I wonder how much it affected my dad's family and like my mom's
Mm-hmm.
family because technically my dad immigrated, well, he didn't immigrate, but like he's firstborn son. So he
Mm-hmm.
was first to leave the nest. And because he was a boy, he was able to go to Bangladesh for college and all that stuff. And then
Sure.
eventually he left to America. And he was the first in his family to do that. I'm a first generation immigrant. And I have to wonder like what that was like to just kind of leave his sisters behind and
Mm-hmm.
what that felt like to them because in our culture, like that's such a sense of security, which is like your father is your provider, and then immediately it's your brother or your like whoever your other male figure.
Sure.
And it's like, I wonder if I ever made someone feel, not me personally, but like our family I made
Yeah.
them feel like they're being betrayed, or, we weren't going to be there for them. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Mm.
Also,
I,
I'll go for it. Go for it.
Go ahead. No, no,
Um,
I was just gonna say that it's interesting to me too when you talk about is that anyone who's an expat or anyone who leaves home, that's like a huge risk. That's a huge
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
right? You're basically leaving your whole family, leaving that place, and going to
hmm,
live somewhere else to work.
yeah,
That's why I've always found it so strange and so interesting that sometimes the adults who leave
uh-huh.
then don't understand why their kids are different. They try to act like, well, what do you mean you're not? Why aren't you falling in line with that culture that I left?
Dude,
Why are
dude.
you? Why aren't you falling in line with the culture that I literally left and put you
Oh
in a
yeah.
school
Yep.
that's a completely different cultural aesthetic? Like, what do you mean? Why aren't you thinking the way I'm thinking? And I see that all the time, and I'm like, wow, that's tough. That's a tough one to be in
Oof.
because I see it with Americans as well, like groups of Americans who are like
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep themselves real contained, like
Yeah.
so you're only around the people who are like that. But man, you've opened up the world to your kid, right?
Yeah.
You yourself left a place. If you really wanted me to grow up
Mm-hmm.
like that, why didn't you just keep me there?
Oh, dude.
Versus what are you moving me around for? And man, I think that it's an unrealistic expectation that I've seen so many expat parents have.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of it's like, man, you got to look at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You left your own country. You took a huge risk. You did
Yep.
something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
The apple isn't going to fall far from the tree,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to force that, I think, is some of the, at least what I've seen from my vantage point, that's some of the most painful
Yeah.
clashes that I've seen on family dynamics overseas as
Oh,
well.
buddy, oh pal. That is so real. Um,
Mm.
I I can't, there's so many times where I'm like confronted by my own culture, my own religion, and it's really hard to like reflect on like when you see your family being who they are and being genuinely who they are, and it's very culturally integrated, religiously integrated family, and it's, you know the expectations are there, the cultural expectations, religious expectations are meeting them, and then you come and visit them. Oh my god. Like, I feel like when we leave, they tell their kids like, yo, don't do what they're doing, like, don't. Like, we're probably the black sheep family, and I don't even know it
Sure.
because I'm just living my life. I think about that all the
Right.
time when I leave like Pakistan,
Mm,
and I'm
mm.
like, oh, because they do kind of openly like hate on America, but it's like
Yeah, yeah.
it comes with the living in the East. But
You know, and here's one thing that I feel blessed. Every family has dysfunction, right? And I'm not going to say that my family is perfect or anything else, but one of the things that I've learned to be grateful for my family is my family in general. They just seem to be happy for me if I'm
Mhm.
doing well.
Right.
And they seem to be just like, but whatever you're doing,
Yeah.
as long as you ain't in jail and as long as you ain't like,
Yeah.
on drugs or something like that, great.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? I'm happy for
Mhm.
you. And if
Mhm.
that's looks this way or that way, so it always also made me feel a sense of freedom to just try
Yeah.
things and to try different stuff because I knew that most of the time, as long as I was
Mhm.
seemed happy, my family was going to be happy for me. Like they might miss me, but man, he's doing well. Little Ronnie's doing well, so I support that.
Wow.
So I feel like as I've
What's
gotten
that
older,
like?
I feel like that's a huge gift, right? That's a
It
huge gift.
is. It
I think. I
is.
mean, and not even just culturally dependent. I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen it whether in all cultures, even it's not this. It's not like every American family like that, right?
Yeah.
There's these strict expectations, or I'm
Mhm.
disappointed in you because you didn't do this. I've never felt that way. As long as I was
Mm.
happy, my seems to be like, well, damn, you're happy because I think they understand it's tough to be happy. That's
Oh
a that's
yeah.
a that's a
But that
yeah,
is such a that just shows that your family probably went through so much, and that like growing up, like they've seen
sure.
shit, like they probably know how difficult it is to find peace and what peace looks like
Yeah,
to an individual. But
right.
damn, it seems like that for me, my initial like thought was like, wow, the bar is so low so that you could dream so high, right? but that bar is
Mm-hmm.
low for a reason. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not just by an accident, like it's purposeful, it's
For
intentful.
sure.
And
For sure.
it honestly makes me kind of jealous. I know that
Well,
you have so many there's so many you're so cultured and like you have like very worldly views, but then I'm like, wow, you have, correct me if I'm wrong, like you don't really have cultures attached to you. You don't have religion attached to you. You're very like a man of all.
yeah, open.
Well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so like for me, it's like there is a book that I live by,
For
and
sure. For sure.
the expectations
100%.
are written on there. And every day I look in the mirror and I'm like, you're not good enough. And they don't think you're good enough either.
That's tough, man. That's
Yeah.
tough. That's tough.
Yeah.
No, because I, I feel like, I don't know, I could be wrong. I feel like even if you don't have a culture attached to that, I think humans feel that way anyway.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
I don't think self doubt goes away. I mean, think
Mhm.
that even if you don't like it,
Yeah.
I don't look at myself in the mirror constantly and be like, damn,
Mhm.
you got it, man. Like
Yeah.
I don't always feel that way. There's times where I'm like,
I hope you don't do that.
man, no, I'm like, man, dude, I'm not doing enough, or I could be
Yeah.
doing this better, right?
Mhm.
And I've learned to manage that, to accept that feeling, and then let it move past me, right?
Yeah.
Not try to force myself out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I imagine
Yeah.
with culture expectations, religious expectations, depending on what they look like and depending on how they're practiced, right? That
Mhm.
adds an extra layer to that.
Yeah.
So I get that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can talk about this forever, but I'm gonna move on to another
Sure.
question, and a question that came up a lot, a
Ooh, okay.
suggestion actually, that we should talk
Oh,
about the DHS days one day. And let me tell
DHS
you
days one day.
something,
All right.
Mr. C. I'm gonna put this
Sure.
out there for all the OG ISG DHSers. I can bleep it out if we can't talk about it.
Okay.
Uh,
Dafron High School folks. Okay.
DHS folks, listen. We're gonna talk about this chicken. We're gonna talk about the chicken incident one day, and you
Oh,
have to watch the chicken
okay.
episode. Mark my
Okay.
words. Mark my words. We're gonna talk about the chicken.
It's legendary chicken episodes. I mean, that will be interesting and entertaining for anybody, even if you didn't go to DHS, to
Mm-hmm.
hear about the
I
chicken
have
incident.
footage. There
Yeah.
is evidence,
Yeah.
and we can talk about many other things. It doesn't only have to be the chicken, and you guys can send in stories. I will keep it
Sure.
anonymous.
All
We can just keep it between us.
right.
But we can
All
talk about
right.
that
Cool
chicken.
beans.
We're gonna talk about that
All
chicken.
right.
That
Sure.
pollo. Dejaj.
Okay. All right.
Dejaj. Yeah,
We
okay. Yeah.
okay.
I'm
The
happy that you're open to it.
I'm open. I mean, I can talk about just about anything. And
Yeah. Okay. So we have 5 minutes left. Okay.
oh, okay.
We're the Q&A segment is done. Thank you guys for answering our questions on our story. Keep a lookout for more, because we will continue to ask you guys what you guys think and what you want us to talk about.
Mm.
We're gonna move on to our next topic, which is Civil War by
Oof.
A24 Films. A really
Yeah,
great
man.
film that Mr. C and I watched recently,
Mm.
about a photojournalist, following a photojournalist as she goes across America,
Yeah, she's going from New York to Washington D.C.
New York to Washington,
So
D.C., to interview the president during a time of civil war in the United States. It takes place
right.
in like an alternate United States where
This dystopian future, if you will, or something like
yeah,
that.
where
Yeah.
California
Mhm.
and Texas are at war. And
No, no, no. California and Texas have united. They're the Western
oh, I
forces.
misinterpreted that
That's
completely
right.
then.
Yeah, they're together. So
Uh-huh.
that I mean, oh my lord. So yeah, it's definitely an
Yeah.
alternate universe where
Yeah.
Texas and California have come together
Yeah.
and
So
are
we're gonna
battling.
talk about that. We're
Huh?
gonna take a little break. Mr. C,
Yo,
what are your initial thoughts about this film?
man, it was an intense film. Like I do recommend people see it, and it definitely pulls the heartstrings. Like it's intense, and then it makes you feel something. And I think that when you think of civil war in the United States, I think a lot of the rhetoric in the United States is that, the country's falling apart. People are just more polarized than ever, which is probably true in some cases. But the film is not really about like Republicans versus Democrat or anything like that within.
100%.
It's just really sort of what would it be like if the
Hmm.
United States fell into this war where they're fighting each other.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is that the movie does a really good job of is you don't really know who the good guy, who you're supposed to be rooting for. It's
Hmm.
just this constant, um, man, does anyone understand why we're still fighting
Yes.
type of thing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a very, that's what I felt coming from it quite a bit is just this from the journalistic perspective, sort of watching and not judging. And then when you're just watching it, it's appalling, right? When you're just watching it and you're just observing it, you're like, this is madness, right? This is crazy.
So, okay, I'm glad that you brought that up because that was such a huge thing for me. I think as someone who's always seen the places that I come from, like Pakistan, Middle East, I've always seen war movies there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
and it's always in those settings where people just assume that it's a war-torn area and
Mm-hmm.
there's no story behind it. There's just
Yeah.
terrorism happening. I have
Yeah.
literally never seen a film like that, a well-produced film like that in America. Like it was so
Yeah.
interesting to watch this movie as someone who looks like me and like just assume that there's terrorism happening. There's just genocide
Sure.
happening, but it's in America. And it's
Right.
it's really funny because there's no orange filter or tint to make it look like it's a dystopian country. They usually do that for the Middle East or
No.
like
Yeah.
Mexico and
Yeah.
stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Nothing like that.
But I loved that. I loved that
Yeah.
we were just like people who were not really involved in what's happening in the world. We are finally the people in the East looking to what's happening in the West and not really
Hmm.
knowing what the situation is going on. Because I
Right.
interact with people like that on a daily basis where they're like, explain to me what's happening in Palestine because I have no idea. And
Right.
I'm like, how do you have no idea? And then I'm like, oh, because of who I am and where I come from, obviously I'm going to know what's happening. But I've
Yeah.
never just had this like empty perspective of what's going on,
Mhm.
but like in America. And I thought that was
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and it was, it's such a, yeah, it's such a good movie for that. And yeah, that there's, what would it be like to just have a war in our own country? I think that people forget that the United States has not seen a war on its own soil since the
Yeah.
1800s,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people talk about World War One, World War Two, Korean War, Vietnam War, but we send people off to fight. Like it doesn't really happen where we're at, right? And so to see it, I think is scary for Americans. When you see it, it's like after like,
Yeah.
whoa, man.
It's really jarring.
And we're a very well armed country, so you're like, yeah, there would be a lot of people with weapons around, right? And
Mm-hmm.
really, going at it. And I think that was, it reminded me of actually when I was a kid. My grandfather, he fought in the Korean War,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was a kid, it was, we were in the midst of the Cold War,
Right.
1980s. So every time we played guns outside, it was like U.S. versus Russia. That's
Mm-hmm.
how it was. Like versus the Soviet Union or U.S. Da da da.
Classic.
Yeah, and I remember my telling my grandfather, I was being all excited, and I talked to my grandfather. I was like, "Yeah," I said, "if there's ever a war, we're gonna win, right?" And my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather was like, "Why do you think that?" I said, "Because we're the good guys. United States will be the good guys."
Mm.
And my grandfather, I remember he just kind of messed up my world a little bit because he was like, "Once you start fighting, no one's a good guy."
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what he meant by that. I was like, "What are you talking
Mm-hmm.
about?" Because I'd only seen, we had movies, we had Rocky
Yeah.
Four. Rocky is obviously,
Propaganda. Ooh,
he's
love it.
obviously a good guy against Ivan Drago, the Soviet guy.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was later on when I was talking to my grandfather about, and he told me more stories about the war in Korea. And just like once the fighting starts,
Yeah.
you're just fighting to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Survival mode.
the soldier's not really thinking about
Yeah.
democracy. The soldier's not thinking about the Constitution. The soldier's not thinking about the soldier is
Mm-hmm.
literally, when you're fighting, you're just thinking about how do I stay alive or keep the people next to me alive.
Exactly.
And in this movie, there's so many different illusions of like
Mhm.
people don't actually know why they're fighting. We never really
Mhm.
know why they're fighting.
Yeah.
They're just someone's trying to kill them,
Mhm.
and so they're trying to kill them back. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think that's the reality of so many conflicts that we forget
Mhm.
about. That we
Yeah.
forget at the human level. Once there's
Mhm.
fighting, people are fighting for their lives, man.
Yeah.
More than anything.
It's true. It's true. Like there, once you cross that line where you're killing people, it's like humanity kind of fades. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
so easy to look at the situation, not be on the ground, and
Hmm.
say like, oh, there is a right and wrong here. When in war, it's like there's so much. It's not black and white. It's not.
Mm,
People, these people are pushed to their limits and forced to make decisions that aren't really up to them, and
right.
often these politicians abandon them.
Oh,
And
for sure.
it was really interesting to see that in the film. There was this one scene I remember you talking about. There's these two snipers shooting at each other in this very open ranged area. And do you want to talk about it? Because I remember you really liked that scene.
Yeah, well, the reason I like it is because we get to this point where someone is shooting at the protagonist and they're kind of hiding and they see these other snipers who are trying to find out where the other sniper is and they're asking, "Well, what's going on? What's going on?" And the sniper is like, "What do you not understand?" And he's like, "I don't, he's trying to get the sniper, I guess, to go deep or to give him a real sense of the situation. And the sniper just simply says, "Someone is trying to shoot us and we're trying to shoot them." And that's all we know. I mean,
Yep.
that's really in that segment, that's all we know
Yeah.
throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
What the issues were, we don't know why the states broke apart. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know what the actual issue is anymore. We don't
Yeah.
even know the people who are going to win. We don't know what that means they're going to do once they
Mm-hmm.
win.
Exactly.
We just know people started fighting. And at this point, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem like anyone really knows why they continue fighting.
Yeah. That
Yeah, man.
scene was, I remember just sitting in the theater and I was like, damn, like
Mm-hmm.
we're forgetting. Like what is this? Like in all of the hate and like, you know, I think people really forget like what you're really fighting for, you know?
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, it's easier for people on the ground to be like, oh, this is just survival mode. But then the people
Mm-hmm.
watching who are through the lens of these photojournalists, they're all like, you're always seeing it from a perspective of someone else. And you'll
Yeah.
never see it through your own eyes because, obviously we're very privileged in that, like, we're not enlisted in the
Mm-hmm.
war, but like,
Mm-hmm.
all I could think about were those moments for like the photojournalists of like Gaza and Palestine. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
it's the way that they displayed PTSD and trauma in that
Mm-hmm.
film. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that happen to the photojournalists in Gaza and
Mm-hmm.
Palestine. Like
Yeah, for
that
sure.
scene where there's a scene where um one of their photojournalist friends who came along for the ride, he was an older gentleman. He kind of saves them from a precarious situation, but he ends up getting shot and dies.
Mm-hmm.
That scene was intense. It was scary. It was traumatic. And the way that one of the characters reacted was just screaming. And his
Mm-hmm.
vices were alcohol, smoking, weed, all this stuff,
Yeah.
sex, and
Trying to numb.
trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
numb himself. But he was just screaming. He was just screaming on the
Mm-hmm.
side of the road while
Mm-hmm.
these tanks and soldiers just walked past him. And
Yeah.
I've literally
Yeah.
seen a
Yeah.
photojournalist with the same name as me, Noor, just screaming
Mm-hmm.
and crying because she did not know how to cope with the realities of the war that she was witnessing.
Yeah.
And I was this film, I was like, wow, like with a lack of information, they were able to deliver this idea and like for me at least this connection so deeply. And anyone can
Mm-hmm.
have that, like you mean like this is not
Right.
singular to any just one genocide. Like
No.
this, anyone can watch this and be like, oh, that happened to like
Yeah,
so many people, you know?
for sure. Yeah, and that's a ugh. Well, you want the history of warfare and humans and why we get into these things. We don't seem to learn. We don't seem to learn our lesson, but it's so real. And there's actually a lot of research on watching a war, watching and being exposed to the images of war and everything else over time. And violence sometimes actually impact people more than some of the people who are actually in the violence,
Yeah.
because those images over time sometimes trigger us even more to constantly be fed in that. And I think that's another thing about our news cycle, the overload of
Mm-hmm.
information and all those kind of things.
Yep.
We can really get ourselves into a spiral of just watching those same things over
Yeah.
and over again and thinking that we'll be okay from it.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to take a break. Our humanity is real,
Yes.
right? Our humanity is real, and what our brains can take, and we're empathetic. So
Mm-hmm.
seeing someone else in pain triggers something neurologically in our brain where you can tell by looking at images of someone's brain that they're watching someone in pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real thing for us. We can feel with others in a
Yeah.
very real way. And so it's brutal.
Yeah. And I there was this there's like over the course of the film, you see the main character Lee kind of unfold before your eyes as
Mm-hmm.
the realities of her trauma kind of catch up to her. And um and I thought that the way that they unpacked that in each scenario was so
Mm-hmm.
cool. And
That's right.
like cool, like in a sense where this is great storytelling, you know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right.
one of the most poignant scenes for me was when there's a character that comes in along for the ride, also, and she's a younger photojournalist, aspiring photojournalist that really looks up to Lee, which is a very seasoned, well-developed photojournalist. And she goes and separates from the group in a really kind of dangerous situation where she just wants to see these bodies that are hanging from like a car
Hanging up.
wash
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
they're still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the one of the mercenaries, I would say, from
Soldiers. You don't even know what
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
you don't know if these are good people or bad people or like so and
Yeah.
so, what do you know? And so he walks with her, and this is her first time seeing like real shit, I would say, like,
Mm-hmm.
the brutality and like lynching of people in front of her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know if it's like admiration, but the way that they made Lee's character kind of like stoic and showed that like this is just another day for her versus
Yeah.
this kid who is literally just watching someone die before her eyes
Mm-hmm.
was it was gut wrenching because I and then Lee was like, "Oh, dude, take a picture with these bodies that you lynched." And the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, there are images like that. There are
Mm-hmm.
images like that that
Yeah.
exist in the world right now. And I wonder how much pressure and how much like pain these photojournalists go through. Like that's the only thing that I
Yeah.
could really think about during this film, which is like these people go through so much and they're not even like they're not trained for this. They're not trained
No.
for warfare at all.
And I wondered too is the question of should one ever get to the point that Lee was at? Like to get to the point to where you can be completely unfazed with seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good thing? Is that really where one should ever be? Or should someone always be incensed, feeling something, being like, this is not right
Yeah.
when they see that?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I ask myself because I do wonder as a whole, we
Mm-hmm.
seem to be more and more desensitized
Yeah.
about many things that go
Yep.
on and stuff that we see. And I think that we see it a lot, right? We see a lot of images
Mm-hmm.
and we brush aside things. We move to the next thing pretty quickly,
Yeah.
right? And so in many ways, that photojournalist, I would think that you could be on the internet all day seeing
Yeah.
just as many images as a photojournalist of all kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
and being desensitized. And I think people do that through themselves through like violence. I
Yeah.
think people do that to themselves. You see, men seem to do it with pornography, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dehumanization of these kind of things.
Right.
And and losing that human aspect of
Hmm.
learning to dehumanize each other.
Yeah.
I think that's a rough thing, and no one ever should ever get to that point.
Do you know about doom scrolling?
I've heard of doom
Yeah.
scrolling.
So
Yes, people
doom
just keep.
scrolling, yeah. You wake up or you're in your bed, you're just continuously looking at, you're refreshing your page. What's next? What's next? What's
Yeah.
next? And it's just a bombardment of information. It's overflowing.
Hmm.
Everything is a
Hmm.
headline these days. And it
Yeah.
feels like more than ever there's just so much that's wrong with the world, but it's
Mm.
because we're constantly fed these breaking news stories, you know?
Sure.
And the truth is, there are really discussing realities that are happening, but I don't
Hmm.
think that we should be consuming it as much as we do. You know, I make it a point to really like separate what I do, like what I look at from like news networks to my own personal like page where this is like a safe space. I don't interact with that stuff there because we do need media breaks, you know? And
Man.
I
Hmm.
see what happens to people, like people closest to me, where
Hmm.
they're just in constant pain because of the things that they're seeing, and they don't know how to cope with the images that pop up on their screen all the time. And it really makes me like I don't know even how to help them besides like, dude, turn off your phone. But the reality is, a lot of them feel like that is such a privilege to just say that I can just turn off my phone, when the reality is people are going through that in real life. Like, oh, if I can't even look at these images, imagine what these people are going through in real life. And like I don't know how to really counter that justification, because it's like I get it, but like, dude, you're a human. Take a break.
I think the same. We can only do so much. We are if one is religious and believes in God, then you understand that you are not God, and one must accept what is happening and know your place. And your place is to try to do good where you are to the best of your ability, right? And I just think of like people in the civil rights movement in 1950s, 60s, and everything else. There was still a lot of terrible things going on in the world, but if they had spent all their time doom scrolling, they never get out on the streets and achieve the things that were able
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
allow progress to be made, right?
exactly.
And what I found, like when President Trump, when he
Mm-hmm.
became president,
Yeah.
there were so many people on the staff who for
Mm-hmm.
4 years,
Mm-hmm.
every single day was a bad day because every single morning they had news about something that President Trump had said that they didn't like, right?
Right.
I never did.
Right.
So while Trump was president, I knew, okay, there's people who hate him. He says some terrible things. Like he
Mm-hmm.
says some things that like, but I don't think about him
Mm-hmm.
because every day my job was to try to be the best person I could be to the people who I come in contact with every day
Mm-hmm.
because that's all I could do.
Yeah.
Right. Every single day they come in bad mood,
Mm-hmm.
pissed off,
Yeah.
and Donald Trump was still president.
Yeah.
None of them were actually going to be activists. I
Right.
see people who I talk to all the time. They're pissed about everything. They're
Mm-hmm.
not on the street.
Yeah.
They're not actually doing anything to go and solve that problem that's
Mm-hmm.
this far away.
Yeah.
If you want to, do that. But if
Yeah.
you're not going to, make the investment and doing the best you can where you are, because
Exactly.
that's all we can do. That's all
Mm-hmm.
we're placed to do. And I think that putting the pressure on yourself, I mean, what to sit back and I used to actually keep myself up at night. And really, I'm not being self righteous about this. This is a problem I've worked through.
Uh-huh.
My wife, she likes to tell the story that when we first got together,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I couldn't go to sleep at night because I was thinking about all the stuff happening in Africa. I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking about my country's own, um, you know, basically us. We supported so many dictatorships, fascist
Mm-hmm.
dictators, and things
Yeah.
that my country was doing that I didn't like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was keeping me up, but it wasn't making me any. It wasn't helping me be better on a day to
Mm-hmm.
day basis for the people who I could do
Right.
something for. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's not about forgetting it. It's not about saying
Yeah.
that those bad things aren't there, but it's does it traumatize you into complete inaction?
Mm-hmm.
Does it keep you from being better or an
Yeah.
example of what you would like to see in the world? I think
Yeah.
that's the thing you have to ask yourself.
It's I think more than anything, what these images remind people of is loss of control and
Mm,
helplessness.
mm,
And that
yeah.
feeling is obviously frustrating. And
Hmm.
I always try to think like, okay, what is in my control? What is versus what is out of my control? I'm not
Hmm.
going to Palestine. I'm not going to Gaza anytime soon. I'm not going like
Yeah.
that's the reality. Like I can't do anything about it. My at
Sure.
the end of the day, tax dollars are going to the Israeli government, like the American government that
Mm-hmm.
fuels, all this stuff. And
Hmm.
I what I can do is try to celebrate Palestinian life, Palestinian
Hmm.
culture, take care of the people who are in my immediate community that are affected by this war because their families are overseas. Making sure that they're supported in ways that they feel supported. Like it's just doing what is within your control. You can go to protests, you can call your representatives and do all this stuff, but it's like do something rather than nothing. Because
Right.
even if all of it is a moot point and it doesn't really go anywhere, you still tried, and that'll make you
Yeah.
feel better than doing nothing at all. And
I agree.
it's just like just I get frustrated because I'm like, okay, but what did you do though? Because like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
upset, that's valid, that's real, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
what are you gonna do about it now? What
For
now?
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And one of the things I have this is a little bit of hope, but you know, the United States is changing, right? The United States, it's interesting because I think many of the people who should be in our government aren't interested in going into government. And many of the people who would be great if they were involved
Mm-hmm.
in maybe influencing more policies and
Yeah.
maybe having these conversations are
Mm-hmm.
not doing so.
Right.
And so eventually, in any kind of country, I think
Yeah.
over time, we're going to have people with more and more diverse viewpoints going
Uh-huh.
into our government. And the more
Right.
and more perspectives that we can represent in our government,
Mm-hmm.
I think the closer we'll get to making better decisions
Mm-hmm.
for the big responsibility that America has. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
with all the power that it has.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I'm hopeful for that. I'm hopeful for that in the future, and
The
that
newer generations.
I hope so, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of old folks hanging around. There's a lot of old folks hanging around. I get that, and I'm not saying that they all have bad ideas either. I'm not trying to hate on
No,
the
no, no,
old
no.
generation,
We love
but
old
I do
people.
think that you need the new energy, right? The new energy to come in, and America's changing generationally. What they look like in terms of their viewpoints, their
Mm-hmm.
perspectives, their everything
Yeah.
else is changing, and so
Yeah.
those things need to be more represented in our government,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can have a good dialogue that moves us forward. I think. Yeah.
And you could see that type of concept happening in the film itself, where
Mm-hmm.
Jessie, the younger photojournalist, she would kind of reintroduce joy and
Mm-hmm.
feelings of like simple comfort of like trying on a new dress and taking a picture
Yeah.
where you're smiling, which Lee had forgotten. Like
Mm-hmm.
she has seen and gone through so much that I think she forgot about happiness and what it was
Right.
like to celebrate life just a little bit. And
For sure.
when she indulged in it, it brought a smile to her face. And it reminded even everyone in the car who was a little more seasoned than Jesse that, oh, yeah, we were once like her. We were once a generation that was still learning and still growing. And people are still hungry for a life beyond what they see. And I feel like that is
100%.
so hopeful, and it was just kind of like really cute and beautiful to watch. Obviously at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the movie it was a little bit different,
Yeah.
but
No. Yeah.
I in that moment, like I was like, wow, this is a really like a heart to heart between like a different generations.
Yeah. And really not to be like self-righteous about expats, right? Because expats have their problems, TCKs have their problems. We're all human beings, everything else. But I think that also it's a real moment for those people who come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, or who have seen the world in different ways. What can you teach instead of thinking about, well, how do I how do I become more like this so I fit in? What perspective can you bring in to this country that you go back to, right? What can you actually teach that you've learned, right? I think that so much of it sometimes starts with this feeling of loss and that, oh
Mhm.
man, versus, man, but I have a perspective, I know something, and to feel
Yeah.
confident in this to say, well, here, maybe I just need to tell people. Maybe I need to
Yeah.
find some way to get that message out there
Hmm.
so that that can grow,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, it was just a great film, guys. Like, highly recommend watching it. There was this one line that the character who died, I forget his name. Do you remember his name? Charlie?
Sammy?
Sammy? Sammy
Mhm.
was like, I forget what the actual quote was, but the reason that they were going to DC was to interview the president, right? And that had not an interview had not happened for like the for months, or was it a
Yeah,
year?
months or almost a year.
A
Yeah.
long period of time. There was no media that came
Mhm.
out where it was like an objective perspective interviewing him. And um in the car, the interviewer was practicing his questions, and they were very like insightful, very deep questions. But then Sammy goes, you know these politicians are often like cowards, and they're probably going to let you down. And
Mm.
at the end of the movie, the last thing that the president says before he's killed is, please tell them to not shoot me, or like, please don't kill me. And
Yeah.
I thought that was like, he really is like that's what happens. Like, these politicians forget that they're just using people as pawns. And
Yeah.
when they control people from the office, they forget what like all they really care about is like themselves at the end of the day sometimes. And I'm like, wow, yeah, self-preservation for this guy, but he
Mhm.
made everybody else die. Yeah, don't kill him,
Well,
but he wanted to kill everybody else.
right, right, and that's so real, and that's I. But let me give you a positive spin on that too. So I think not to forget, and what we can also miss from that too is that these people who are making all these things happen around the world,
Yeah.
they're just people.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just people who took some action and who have gone in that direction,
Hmm.
which means any of us can also just do it.
Yeah.
Like, we have imposter syndrome and we think that everyone who's out there doing something is special. No, no, no.
Hmm.
They're just someone who got going
Yeah.
and has made some attempts.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us who are maybe more worthy of some of those spots don't make the
Hmm.
attempts. And so I wish we
Yeah.
would.
I mean, there's a lot of fear. I know that the concept of canceling kind of doesn't exist anymore, because there's always something bigger that happens afterwards and people forget. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. It's like nowadays you get doxxed for anything that crazy that you say online.
I
And
don't know what doxed means.
doxed is like, people will search into your life, your information, and then they'll post like
Hmm.
your home address, your work address online, all of your contact
Oh, no.
information. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people get like swatted, where they'll call the SWAT team to like someone's house and just do that out of pure entertainment because they want to troll. But yeah, so like there's that fear of getting doxxed. Like, I really am sympathetic to people that get doxxed. Like, I'm sorry that happens.
Please don't dox me.
We'll see. I said some pretty crazy stuff today now. But yeah, like I wonder, like, that fear is very real, but I feel like it's also going away because people are
Mm-hmm.
realizing that it's not working. People are still miserable whether or not they're fighting or not. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah, yeah.
I think that they would rather now be fighting and miserable than doing nothing and being miserable. It's kind of going in that direction. We see it with the encampments happening on these like UC campuses, and people are
Yeah.
tired. They don't want to feel defeated anymore.
Well, and I'm of the opinion that an open discussion where no one's canceled, an open discussion where people can debate and throw out their ideas and have a vigorous discussion on ideas ends up leading to maybe not either side winning,
Mm-hmm.
but more wise decision making going forward.
Mm.
Because I think that whenever you don't let people talk, whenever you try to shut down speech and you don't let
Yeah.
people come to the fore, the stupidest ideas, they find some audience in a
Yeah.
hidden way.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, I mean, the best way to actually make a book sales is to
Uh-huh.
ban it. You can have a terribly really bad book, but you make it a banned book, and everybody wants to know, why is it
Yeah.
banned,
Yeah.
right? And it's the same thing with ideas. If you're like, oh no, this idea can
Mhm.
never be talked about in this location,
Mhm.
you're just going to have more people going, well, what are they saying,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
if that idea is forced to debate in front of people in
Mhm.
the open,
Mhm.
oftentimes it becomes clear how ridiculous it is.
Mhm.
And it doesn't get the chance to make a bunch of, people on some echo chamber
Mhm.
get behind it and
Right.
get brainwashed by it. So
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in this open conversation, open conflict that doesn't lead to violence,
Mhm.
but a conflict of ideas. I think I don't know if we have a better solution for going towards better decisions.
I mean, that's so ideal, right? Like utopian society. Like I know that those discussions do happen in maybe different circles, but when it comes to like stuff like this, I don't ever, I mean, at least I don't know, but there's conflict happening. Like it's literally just
Right.
happening.
Right. But I think that so much of you see the conflict now.
Hmm.
Remember, all the conflicts that are happening across like the United States and the
Hmm.
separation of the United States also happened during the rise of a movement of canceling and safe spaces.
Mm-mm.
You can't talk about that.
Yeah.
No, you're banned from this university. No,
Yeah.
you're canceled. No, I
Hmm.
don't like your idea.
Censorship.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that at one point in time, if you were liberal, you were actually against censorship. You were trying
Hmm.
to keep the Christian right from censoring you.
Yeah.
And then we've now gone to, well, I want both sides want to cancel each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so therefore, no one talks and you have more and more separation. And
Hmm.
what we do know is the more and more separated people are, the more they don't talk and they're more likely to go to violence and go to
Hmm.
blows than they are. The more I see you, the more
Hmm.
obviously you're actually a human and you're actually all right. And you're
100%.
kind of stupid on some things, but in general, you're an all right guy. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
oh,
Like
you're
that's
talking
how
about
we see
me.
each other. No, no, never you, never you, never you,
But see, Mr. C, it's so
never you.
relevant to our theme song. Can we just talk? Can we just talk? Talk about
Done.
where we're going.
Man, Nor,
Dude,
you
Khalid,
got the jams, Nor.
yeah,
You got
dude.
it.
Khalid needs to get on this podcast and just sing for us because I feel like he knows
Is he
exactly what
still
we're about.
is he still dropping albums?
I don't think so. I haven't heard from him in years. But that song is relevant. That song is
You can
very
always reach
relevant.
out to you can always reach out to him somehow. We'll find out where he's at. Aren't you in LA? Aren't all the stars out there?
See, this is some kind of ignorant, like, like when people ask me stuff like this, I'm like, yeah, you've never been to California. Like, you literally never been here. I live in Chino Hills.
Hey,
I grew up
yeah,
around cow farms and corn.
yeah.
Like, that's
Hey
where I'm
man,
at.
I'm from Texas, so people are always asking, well, you don't have a Texas accent. They want me to have a country accent, or they ask if I've been hunting or if I've ever ridden a horse. And no, I'm a city kid. So yeah,
Oh, dude,
I
my
get you.
favorite question is, have you ever ridden a camel in Saudi Arabia? They drive camels to school. Yeah, dude, all the time, actually.
No.
And then we go home and we slaughter the camel and we eat it.
Is that
No,
what you
I
tell
took a
people, Nor?
bus. No. I took a freaking bus, dude. Like, what do you want me to say? But yeah, we only got a couple more minutes left on this podcast. I hope you
Cool.
guys enjoyed our discussion today. Got a little
Yeah,
deep,
man.
but it was great. I really liked
Yeah.
this topic.
Yeah,
Um,
man.
what do you got to say, Mr. C?
No, man. I enjoy talking to you, and I just think I hope that people are getting some from our podcast, man, because
Inshallah.
I think what we went out for is, hey, we just want to talk about things, bring some different perspectives, and then eventually, hopefully, get people interacting with us and giving us their ideas, so we can
Mhm,
we can riff off those as well. So
for
it's
sure.
been good. I hope it's helpful to somebody out
Yeah.
there.
Thank you guys again for your questions. Like we honestly enjoy them. Please keep interacting with us. It's one of the best things. Like I look forward to it all the time. Um,
Cool.
but yeah, this has been The Other Americans. Thank you for joining us. I was your host, Noor Sultan.
And Ronnie Caldwell,
And join us on the next one. See you guys.
be good.